We have two candidates with us this month. They're both running for the 4th U.S. Congressional District, and that would be John Molinar and Peter Knichi. And real quick, I'll go over kind of the format for our candidate forum. Well, also I'd like to mention, all of the candidates running for the 4th District were invited, but multiple emails and invitations, and I never did receive a response from Paul Mitchell or Jeff Holmes' candidates, or campaigns. So we tried to include everyone, and these gentlemen graciously accepted our invitation. But anyways, yeah, a little on our format. Now this is not a debate, so we would like to save any rebuttals for your closing statements. You'll be given 2 minutes at the end for that. The questions were chosen at random from the list that was provided to each campaign. The candidate starting order will alternate with each new question. You will be given 60 seconds to answer each question unless otherwise specified. After the series of questions, we'll take some audience-submitted questions with the same 60 seconds to answer. And again, we'll end with a 2-minute closing statement from each candidate. And to the audience, please just remain respectful during the whole event. And if you feel compelled to applaud, if we hold that to the end, that'll help us get through the whole process a lot quicker. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Brian mentioned that if we had time, there would be some questions from the audience. Stan, I believe, has got a bunch of green sheets he's passing out, so if you would like to write a question on it, there are no guarantees it will be used, but there's certainly that chance. And I, for one, am happy there's only 2 candidates have shown up tonight. I had trouble keeping track of 4 last time and whose turn it was to go next, so this will be a lot easier, I hope. Okay, gentlemen, we're going to start off with 90 seconds, and the first question, and since you're sitting closest to me, John, what is your reason for running for office?
Well, first I'd like to thank we the people of Mid-Michigan for hosting this forum, and Jim Bourne for being our moderator, and for all of you for coming out. This says a lot. You know, people who care about the future of our country. I'm running for office because I want to use my skills and talents and ability to serve you in Washington, D.C. and help move our country in a better direction. I think if you talk to people who support me and know my record, they would say that I'm a proven, trusted, constitutional conservative. And I've demonstrated that. I grew up here in Midland, well, Mid-Michigan. Grew up in Midland, was a chemist, was a charter school administrator, been in business development, and more recently have been part of a team that's working to turn around Michigan, to move Michigan in a better direction by balancing our budget, paying down debt, putting money in the rainy day fund, rolling back regulations that are hindering jobs. You know, I've also been a leader in fighting for our constitutional principles. I was one of the few conservatives in the Senate who stood up against the Obamacare Medicaid expansion and fought that. And you know, sometimes you have to lead against leaders of your own party. But to me, fighting for the Constitution and those conservative principles is worth fighting for. Now, I may not be the wealthiest person in this race, but quite frankly, I don't believe this election is for sale. But I can fight for our constitutional conservative principles, and tonight I want to ask for your vote.
Well, John alluded to, he's not the wealthiest candidate in this race, so that must mean that I'm the wealthiest one, and thank you very much, I truly appreciate it. My name is Pete Knichi. I'm running to represent this district in the U.S. House. The reason why I'm running is that I truly understand that the purpose of a representative at the federal level is to secure our liberty. That's the only reason for being there. I truly understand that the greatest threat that we face as a nation today is from our own government. Our federal government is supposed to have three main duties, and this is broken out in the Constitution. The first one is providing for our common defense. Second one is maintaining our sovereignty, and the last one is to represent our interests in world affairs. The federal government has no authority whatsoever over the daily lives of the people or the daily operations of the states. And when that barrier was broken decades ago, is when our plight started to go downhill as far as a free nation. And I truly believe that unless we can restrain our government and get back to our constitutional principles, I do not think we're going to exist. We'll run into a situation, as Reagan was talking about, how we'll be sitting around our tables telling our kids what it was like to be free. I'm very, very much for acting as free men. I'm strong for nullification. What I say is that if anything comes down from the federal government that's outside of its authority, I think it's incumbent that the people, the state representatives, any organization refuse to honor it. Thank you very much.
Actually, Pete, you're going to be first up on this next question. So, if elected, how would you address the issue of illegal immigration?
I truly believe that we're a nation so with law, and I know that we can secure the border if we want to. What I would say right now is I would have Jan Brewer and Rick Perry take their National Guard under their control and go over to secure the border. The Constitution grants the states the right to defend themselves from invasion without congressional approval. That's the first thing. The second thing is once we secure the border, I would cut off benefits, federal benefits for illegals. I would cut off housing, health care, food stamps, everything else, because that's just encouraging them to come in. Whenever an illegal is picked up during the course of normal practice, going to school, health care, something like that, if they're illegal, they have to be deported back to their nation of residence, and then they can apply for a visa or come over legal if they want. So I'm just for enforcing the existing laws. I am dead set against amnesty. I would also like to modify the 14th Amendment so that that illegals cannot confer citizenship upon illegal babies.
Well, Peter and I agree on many things. One thing we agree on is securing the border. I think that's got to be job number one. And as you watched Governor Perry talking, it's clear that he needs more boots on the ground. We ought to be using more and better technologies, and we ought to have the fence built in appropriate places where it makes sense. Secondly, I think Senator Cruz has proposed legislation that would not allow the president to grant amnesty. And I think that's important because, as he has said, you have a magnet that's drawing people across our border with false hopes of amnesty. And it's just wrong to do that because when you look at the children who are coming across, many of them are going through grueling circumstances, being harmed physically, emotionally, and it's wrong to send a false message. So I think we need to be clear. I've always been opposed to government funding for illegal residents here, and I think that's important.
So, John, what are the criteria you use to evaluate legislation to determine if you can support it?
Well, I think you got to start with the foundation, which is our Constitution, and then secondly, you have to look at the principles that it's built upon. Is it the right role for government? Is it something government should be doing, or is it something that people should be doing for themselves? So I will continue to evaluate that. I'm also very strongly a believer that Congress has an important oversight role with the executive branch. Much of our problem in this country right now is overreach by the federal agencies like the EPA and their war on coal, like the EPA wanting to regulate mud puddles on farmers' land. And I think we need to be very clear that Congress, as part of our checks and balances, needs to step up and have oversight appropriately of the federal agencies.
Want the question again?
Yes.
what are the criteria that you would use to evaluate legislation to determine if you can support it?
Again, if I go to Congress, I realize that the duty of Congress, again, it's those three functions I talked to you about: defense, maintaining our sovereignty, and representing our interests in world affairs. So whenever I look at legislation, I would look to see, first of all, if it was under the jurisdiction of Congress. And if it basically dealt with anything dealing with the people or with the states, I would be dissuaded from encouraging Congress to get involved. If there was something, a piece of legislation that transferred responsibility for something which was already usurped, such as transferring the Department of Education from the federal government back to the states in a timely manner, like over 8 years or so, I would support that. But I would never, ever support an increase in responsibility of the federal government for anything which increases dependency on government, increases control over the people, or negates our constitutional rights.
So Pete, what is the best way to attract businesses to Michigan to provide good paying jobs?
Well, the way that I would attract businesses to Michigan, I was in Washington a while ago and I talked to a congresswoman, and she said very clearly that of all the money that the federal government collected, 70% of it went to for social programs, anything dealing with the people. 70% of it went to funded bureaucracy, and only 30% ended up with the intended recipients. What I would do is I would say the state of Michigan or any other state should, for example, just collect 30% of what we now send to the federal government. The 70% that's not collected and not sent to Washington would be kept by the businesses. This is answering your question. Kept by the businesses. It can be used by those businesses for capital acquisition, for hiring, for promotion, for true wealth creation. So again, it's restraining the federal government, getting them out of our lives, not allowing them to extract as much capital from society as they want, and let the people that earn the money keep the money so they can use it as they deem proper.
Well, I've been part of the team here in Michigan that's been working on this. We've eliminated the Michigan business tax. We're phasing out the personal property tax. And let me just put in a plug. I hope you all vote yes on Proposal 1. I think that's an important part of our being competitive as a state. So you have the regulatory climate, and when you look at things like the EPA overreach, we need to scale back that. We also need to reform the tax code. When you consider that the United States has the highest corporate taxes in the world, that's something that discourages investment here in the United States. It encourages companies to keep their dollars overseas offshore. We ought to be creating a tax code that encourages businesses to invest here for jobs and growth economically.
So John, what do you feel is the biggest challenge facing the 4th District, which is the job you're running for?
Well, I think across the board we need to make sure we have jobs. Right? That's, a strong economy is important for our country. We have a $17.5 trillion debt. One of the ways we're going to get to dealing with that debt is to have growth in our economy. So we ought to be growing at 4 to 5%. To do that, we need to cut spending, get our fiscal house in order. We also need to reform the tax code. So those are key things. At the same time, you can't have government policies that punish job providers and individuals and overreach the federal government. So that's a combination, but I would say jobs has to be the forefront.
The greatest problem the 4th District sees is really a complete takeover of society by government. And this manifests itself in job flight overseas. Job flight overseas happens because, as John mentioned, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, except for Japan, if I recall. We have regulations that make it almost impossible for us to compete in a manufacturing environment. We have federal interference in labor relations, such as minimum wage, which drives our labor costs up. So again, the only solution really is to get the federal government out of our lives, because everything the federal government gets involved in, it basically destroys. I'm going to sound like a broken record over time, but when you have a free, unregulated people excel, and this has been proven in our history. From 1787 to 1930, the people were unregulated, and we went from third world nation to a world-class superpower in every regard. That's because we had no government in our lives.
sorry, I'm confusing him. We're just trying to keep it fair. B, what is the best asset of the 4th Congressional District that needs to be promoted or supported?
The best aspect of the 4th District is really people. You know, the great thing about the American people is that we have a work ethic. And it's not a work ethic that we have to work, it's a work ethic in that we know that if we perform our duties, if we look out for our best interests, we're going to excel. I mean, if you drive around, I see the farmers, I see the small businesses. When I was getting my signatures, I was walking around door to door, and I went into the small insurance agencies, I went into the retail real estate shops, retail shops. People here have a great moral ethic, they have a great work ethic. And what we need to do is just allow them to keep more of what they earn and just excel no matter what they do.
Well, I would agree with Peter. We have tremendous people. The values here are fantastic. When I travel around, there's a lot of innovation. When I look at agriculture, anybody who goes to a farm these days sees the high technology and the innovation that's going on in agriculture. We have industry. We have so many natural resources. We have much to build upon. Ronald Reagan gave us hope because he said America's best days are ahead of us, and I truly believe that. But we need to make opportunities for the next generation. We need to pay down this debt. We need to have a strong America. I believe in what Ronald Reagan believed in peace through strength. So those are challenges ahead of us, but I'm very confident we have the young people who are being mentored by people who have a strong work ethic and strong values here in this region.
John, do you support building the Keystone XL pipeline?
Absolutely. I think it's very important that we do that. It's jobs. We need to move towards energy independence. We need to have an all of the above energy policy ranging from nuclear, coal. I'm very concerned about the war on coal with the Obama administration because that will drive up the cost of electricity for families, also for industry. And for us to be competitive, we need to have low-cost energy, and that is a big part of the solution.
By the time we're done, I'll understand that.
I hope I do.
Of course, I support the Keystone Pipeline. No problem whatsoever. We have more oil in this nation than all the OPEC nations combined, and I'm very, very much for having private investment used by the private sector to develop it. I do not want a government policy that goes through and says, how should we develop our energy? I want the free market, as well as the states, as well as industry, to go through and say the best way to provide energy to the United States is to have a natural free market combination of oil, coal, nuclear, and if there's a place for wind or a place for solar, so be it. But I don't want the government to go through and subsidize any form of energy whatsoever. Again, the free market, what they do is they look at the energy source, and if it's a viable source, the free market will invest money into it and make it work. If it's not a viable source, such as what the government does, you're just going to throw money down a sinkhole.
Do you feel the recently passed right-to-work law has had a positive or negative effect on Michigan's economy, and why?
I think it's had a very positive effect. For two reasons. First of all, it improved economic growth. People are not slaves, and you have a right of association. And if an employee wants to work for an employer, they should not need to get permission from a third party such as a union. But the nice thing is with the right to work, it's benefited the unions as well as the non-union employees, because now the unions have to provide an actual service that the members want to subscribe to, and it's been a positive benefit for everyone.
Well, I would agree, and I had the opportunity to vote for right to work, and probably nothing said it to me better than when I was at the community center one day working out in the gym and had a gentleman come up to me and tap me on the shoulder, and he had heard about my voting on right to work, and he said he was a steel worker and wanted to talk to me about that. So I thought, well, this will be interesting. He said, I want to thank you for your vote on right to work. He said, I've been paying $1,000 a year in union dues, And what this is doing is helping me understand what I'm getting for those dues and opening a dialogue, because now I have a choice. And to me, that said a lot. I think it sent a powerful message around the United States that Michigan is open for business, is in a new era. We are turning around, and so I think it was very positive, and I think job providers are looking at Michigan in a very different light because of it.
So, John, would you support ending lifetime benefits for members of Congress and having any type of their retirement funded through the Social Security Fund?
You know, I don't know a lot about the retirement system for Congress, because quite frankly, I'm applying for a job, and that's not why I'm interested in this job. But I would certainly say that members of Congress ought to be treated like other people in our society. There should not be special privileges. We ought to be encouraging people to serve and recognizing that service, but certainly not giving special privileges. So I'd be open to all of those ideas.
I agree. I don't think the members of Congress should serve a term and have lifetime benefits. That's just not right. But the big thing also is that it's important not to discourage people. I mean, I'm running for Congress. I'm, regardless of what I said in my first, opening remark, I'm not the wealthiest candidate in this race. But I know that it's a huge task to run for office, and it's a great sacrifice. And I don't think it's fair to punish people and say, if you go to Washington, you know that you're going to be punished with a low salary, you're not going to get any benefits or whatever. I'm not saying that you should have, full lifetime benefits or be treated like a king or queen, once you retire. But I don't think we want to punish the people, because if you punish the people, what's going to happen is they're going to look for other ways to make money, such as through lobbyists or such as through backdoor deals or something like that. Justin Marsh is a great guy. He went into Congress with a net worth of less than $1 million. He still has net worth of less than $1 million. Other people who are less moral went in with less than $1 million. After a couple of years, they have well over $8 million. I don't want to encourage that type of practice.
Yeah, but some of them are broke.
That's only because their book's not selling.
The next question is, how would you address the inadequate care being provided to veterans at the VA?
Well, this is a situation where, again, the government's involved, and the government has no competency to do anything dealing with the people. One of the primary duties of Congress is to provide for our national defense, and you can't provide for national defense without soldiers. I think it's imperative that the government honor all their commitments that they made to any people that enlisted in the Army. As far as the VA is concerned, I would not even have VA hospitals. I would allow the veterans to go through, get some sort of health insurance card, and have them go to any hospital that they so deem proper. Mayo Clinic, Henry Ford, Mercy Center, whatever hospital they wanted to go to, and then just have the government pick up the bill. They shouldn't be forced to go to VA hospitals, and they shouldn't be forced to be subjected to substandard care.
I think what's happening with the VA is a huge tragedy for our country. I think people should lose their jobs who were responsible for that. I also think there should be criminal prosecutions, and that's something that needs to happen very swiftly. There needs to be additional congressional oversight getting to the bottom of this, because there's no way that the people who fought for this country and did so much to preserve our freedoms should be treated this way. And like Peter, I would like to see veterans have more flexibility in their care. One of the things that would trouble me is I would hear people from Alpena, veterans who'd have to come all the way, to Saginaw to get some kind of a medical, evaluation, when instead they could have been right in their home community and received that. So we got to have a system that's more flexible and meets the needs of our veterans. And in the case of the VA, we ought to swiftly go after those who lied and basically committed murder by their neglect.
John, we've had an instance like this where and do you think it is acceptable for a judge to consider and cite foreign law in court decisions, or should there be a strict adherence to the U.S. and Michigan constitutions?
I'm a strong believer in American law for America's courts, and that's something that is non-negotiable.
Every single judge, as well as elected official at both the federal and state level, swears to uphold the Constitution. If they swear to uphold the Constitution, they cannot cite foreign law. In my opinion, it's not an opinion, but I guess I'll say my opinion, any judge that does cite foreign law or that rules based on foreign law should be impeached. There's no question about it whatsoever. And that falls to the legislature to do it, whether state or federal.
This next question, you get a few more seconds to answer because of its publicity and its also complexity. Do you support the Affordable Care Act as it exists today? If not, would you repeal, replace, and or change the law?
I do not support Obamacare whatsoever. What happened is the people of the United States never ever granted the Congress, they never delegated authority for the health care to Washington. And since we never did that, that means that Washington has no authority whatsoever to deal with the health care needs of the people, none whatsoever. So I would repeal it, not even questioning it. But until it's repealed, what I would strongly support is that we, as a state, as health providers and as people, refuse to honor, implement, or enforce dictates of Obamacare. And if I get elected to Congress, what I will do is I will use the full power of my office to go through and support anyone who chooses not to honor the dictates of Obamacare. It seems like we are free men and we are free women. And if we're going to remain free men and free women, we have to assert our rights. And we can't be led around such as sheep, and I don't want to degrade anyone, but we can't be led around such as sheep and follow whatever the federal government says. I have never ever granted the federal government superiority over our lives. I know that the federal government exists for very, very limited functions, and one of them is not Obamacare, and I refuse to honor it as a person or as a representative.
I led the fight against the Obamacare Medicaid expansion in the Michigan Senate at a time when our party leadership was advocating for that. I stood up and spoke out against it on the Senate floor. And the same thing with the exchange. I fought against the exchange. I'll continue to do that in Washington, D.C. And I believe we will have a vote to repeal Obamacare. Now the challenge is going to be, what will the Senate do? And we're going to need to elect a Republican U.S. Senator, and that would be Terry Lynn Land, who could help on this in the Senate. We need a partner in the Senate. At the end of the day, the President would still have to sign it. I look to when Newt Gingrich basically forced President Clinton into welfare reform after he had vetoed it a number of times. And it was because there was so much momentum behind it of the American people and Congress, and put something on his desk that finally he had to agree to it. Now, President Obama, as we know, has been repealing it bit by bit on his own. But he's just postponing it until after the election. Well, we need to make such a compelling case to the American people that this needs to be repealed, and I will help lead the fight on that in Congress.
John, with all the unconstitutional happenings in Washington, how would you bring us back to a constitutional republic?
Well, the first thing is I want to salute the people here who care deeply about the Constitution. It needs to happen at the earliest levels where young people get an appreciation for our Constitution. I think, to me, it deserves reading regularly, and we ought to instill that in the next generation. In Congress has an important role with this checks and balances, and we can do everything we can to lead on this front. We have a president right now who wants to govern with a pen and a phone. That's not acceptable. But we as Americans need to make the case that that's not acceptable. And Congress can lead the way on that. So I intend to communicate these constitutional conservative principles both in my campaign and in Washington. What you'll find with me is I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. I've demonstrated that here in Michigan, and I'll continue to do that in Washington, D.C.
I have really three people that I'm going to talk about. One is Sheriff Mack. He was in Arizona. The government came after him a while ago and said he had to enforce the provisions of the Brady Bill. Sheriff Mack said no, he wasn't going to because he knew it went directly against the Constitution. He actually refused to do it. He went to the Supreme Court and won. So the provisions were not implemented. Another gentleman is Mark Baker, just in Missaukee County. The DNR came over and said, you have to kill your pigs. He said, no, I'm not going to. He relied on the protection of the Constitution. He refused to do so. The DNR backed down, and now he's a free pig farmer. Another guy is Clive Bundy, over in, with, I think it was Nevada, I forget, but with his grazing. He refused to submit to the Bureau of Land Management, and he won. If we are going to remain a free nation, we as a people have to go through and assert our constitutional rights, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Stan, I'll take a couple more. If you've got them. Let's go with one more on the script before we go to the off-the-script ones, which I had already picked one. We'll take a few more seconds for this one. What would you do to address the ever-increasing national debt?
Well, first of all, the national debt, we have to balance our budget. And if you had any organization, the first thing they would do is balance the budget. And we can balance the budget. I have a book I wrote about how to do it. Would fully fund the constitutional duties, defense, immigration, and the others, and would have to cut whatever is necessary of non-constitutional functions to address it. But the way to pay down the debt is we have, as I mentioned earlier, more oil in this nation than all the OPEC nations combined. We should allow the free market to use private investment to develop that. Just the proceeds from oil, right now we're spending close to $30 billion every single month importing oil from abroad. If we simply go through and went and allow the U.S. to develop its own oil, that would be putting $30 billion a month right back into the economy. The prosperity that we're seeing in the Balkan reserves in North Dakota and Montana would be spread throughout the entire nation. That prosperity would do a couple of things. First of all, the government, whether it's allowed to do so or not, would be receiving a huge amount of royalty payments from that oil. The second thing is prosperity through economic growth would decrease the need for government payments at the federal level as well as at the state level. So that's just one little thing we could do to pay off our debt.
I think Peter's ideas of growth are important. I also think that we have a spending problem in Washington, D.C., and when it comes right down to it, we need to cut spending. And in Michigan, what we've done is we've balanced our budget, we've been paying down debt, putting money in the rainy day fund. And budgets are about priorities. And so we need, as a nation, to make the case for what are those priorities. And one of the things that help us in the state level is we have a balanced budget requirement. And I support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution because I think that would help anchor the need for a balanced budget. Secondly, I support the penny plan, which reduces spending 1 cent, 1% each year, because I think we need to get away from this trajectory of additional federal government spending. And until we have a limit, it will just continue. So those are things that I will fight for. At the end of the day, it's also going to require entitlement reform. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we need to keep our commitment to our seniors, but at the same time reform our entitlements in such a way that the next generation will have them when they need them.
John, what specifically would you do to make government smaller?
Well, I just mentioned the penny plan. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, government priorities, we need to look for ways to cut spending. And so much, right now, we don't have budgets passing in the federal government. The House has passed them year by year. The Senate has periodically passed them. We should require Congress to put a budget on the president's desk. It's not that difficult, but it requires discipline and it requires people speaking out. Most Americans probably didn't realize the Senate had not been passing budgets for years. We need to make that crystal clear for the American people and demand no less that Congress get budgets, and then we need to find a way to move to the balanced budget and then pay down debt.
I'll do two things. First, I'm not going to repeat my question, my answer from before because I have so little time, but it's the 30%, 70% I was talking about before. I go through and have the states just collect what we need proper, let the people keep what they need, but that would cut the government out of the mix. The other thing is I have something called a negative baseline budget. And what that involves is, first of all, just balancing the budget. Most people here, I think, know that the federal budget automatically increases about 8% every single year, which means that it essentially doubles every 10 years. What I would do is I would balance the budget immediately, and again, we can do it. I have it, how to do it in my book. But once it's balanced, what I would do is I would go through every non-constitutional program, health and human services, education, environment, and I would decrease that by 8% the first year and the same dollar amount every year thereafter. And then that means in 12 years, all non-federal authority departments would be phased out completely. That's how I would decrease government. It has to be done in a short manner because if it's too long, it's never going to happen. So I do 12 years.
If elected, how would you avoid the trap of party politics?
I think I've already avoided the trap of party politics because the party wants nothing whatsoever to do with me. So, no, I am a Republican because a Republican is supposed to be a party of smaller government, less taxes, less spending, and defender of our rights. But I am as disgusted with our Republican representatives in Washington, such as the Boehner, the McCains, the Lindsey Grahams, as I am with the Democrats, the Pelosi's and the Reids, because our leadership has totally betrayed our principles. When I say stuff like that, I know I am not going to be drawn into party politics if I get to Washington. But there's a handful of people in Washington that are very, very good, and they are Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Justin Amash, McClintock Brown. They want to go through and they want to solve our nation's problems, and that's who I want to join. So anyone who wants to decrease the scope and power of government over the people, I will support them.
Party politics?
Party politics.
I think the best way is to put your principles first. And I've done that in the Michigan legislature when it came to the Obamacare Medicaid expansion. I spoke out against leaders in our own party who were advocating for it, even our governor. When it came to Common Core, I spoke out against it. I don't think it's right to have the federal government more and more in charge of our educational system. Now, there were many in our party who wanted to support that. I spoke out against it. And sometimes you have to put constitutional principles, conservative principles, ahead of your own party. Now, on the other hand, sometimes you need the party to pass legislation. And I think it's naive to think that you can accomplish something in Washington, D.C. without the support of a party. You don't want to be a no man's land. You want to have an effective team that gets things done according to constitutional principles, and that's what I'll fight for as your congressman.
We're going to do a wrap-up now. You each have 2 minutes, I've been told. And I guess, John, we'll stay with the direction that we were going, and you go first.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming out. And again, Jim, thank you for moderating and for all that you're doing to help our country move in a better direction. And I want to be part of that, and I want to work with you. We have an election coming up August 5th. That's 2 weeks away. And I need your vote, I need your help and support. I believe we can win this, and I believe we can move America in a better direction. Ronald Reagan used to talk about America's best days are ahead of us. I believe that still can be the case. I am not discouraged. I'm not losing hope in America. I believe we can do better. Now, it's going to take leadership, and it's going to take proven, trusted, conservative, constitutional conservative leadership. And I believe I've demonstrated that by the work we've done here in Michigan. Whether it was passing right to work, whether it was paying down debt and balancing our budget, whether it was repealing meaningless and burdensome regulations, we're doing that here. I want to be part of a team, including all of you, that does that for America. We need jobs, we need opportunity, we need a strong America that is respected abroad, and a strong America that provides for opportunity here for our citizens, and especially the next generation. So tonight I ask for your vote. I want to thank Peter Konieczny for being here in this candidate forum. He and I have had the opportunity to do that a number of times together, and I commend him for that. And I think it's important that you know your congressman, because at the end of the day, you're trusting them to represent you a long ways away in Washington, D.C. and advocate on your behalf. And so tonight I ask for your support. Thank you.
Well, I totally agree with John. I think it's important for you to know your congressman. So my name is Pete Konieczny, and I live up in Roscommon. So nice to know you. My big feeling is the way I differ from the other candidates is that I have never, ever accepted the superiority of the federal government over the people. And the whole reason why I'm running for the seat is that I think that our system of government is upside down. The Constitution established the perfect government for a free people because the federal government was extremely limited. And the people took care of their own needs through their own endeavor, primarily the free market, voluntary charity. And if we wanted some sort of government assistance, it was always handled by the states, never the federal government. When that was enforced, we had no need for an income tax. We had no need for the IRS. We had no debt whatsoever because federal spending was only 2 to 3% of gross domestic product. That's how it should be. In the 1930s, everything went haywire, and the federal government broke those bounds, and it's been breaking it ever since. Now we're spending 10 times what we're supposed to be spending. We can't collect enough money from the private sector to pay for the government lust for power, and we have to turn things around. So my entire focus is to go through and restrain the federal government, and I have solutions as to how to do it. The first solution, again, is Article 6 in the Constitution says every single state and local official has to swear to uphold the Constitution. Not the laws of the federal government or the Supreme Court rulings, but the Constitution. And I'm insistent that the states and the local officials say no to federal overreach, just exactly as Sheriff Mack did and just exactly as Mark Baker did. Because if you stand on the Constitution and insist that its provisions be honored, the federal government will back down. And if we have 300 million people in this country that are insisting on their constitutional rights and saying no to the federal government, that's the only way we're ever going to turn things around. That's how I differ from my opponents, because I do not look to government for the solution. I look to the people to restrain government.
Let's give a big round of applause. Thank you, candidates. I'm sorry the other two candidates could not be here, but I hope that the two of you, between you, get 100% of the vote that's here.